some very esteemed speakers. I'm not going to present them again, but they're going to probably present themselves when they're doing the presentation. I think at this stage, Patricia, maybe you can just start with a presentation on the project of Open Knowledge Foundation. For those of you just connected to the live stream, just a reminder, Patricia is going to do his presentation, that we're going to hear from all our speakers who are going to present their own projects on electoral processes, and then we're going to have a roundtable discussion. Yeah, Patricia, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Just doing like a quick screen share. Okay, well, thank you everyone for being here. I'm gonna skip the presentations because Sarah already did it better than me. So I'm gonna jump directly to our project of digital public infrastructure, speaking a little bit about the context of where this project borns. As Sarah mentioned, I'm an activist from Argentina. I have been working in elections for like the last the last decade, maybe. And everything of the idea behind this project started around 2019. We were like monitoring the elections of Bolivia. There were like some tight elections at that point in time. And in the middle of the elections, well, there were like some misconceptions and then some alleged fraud. There was going to be fraud as they were counting votes. They were going to say, okay, no, the votes are not correct. There is fraud here. Basically, in a summary, Evo Morales, if he got some differences in votes, he would be elected and he didn't need to go to a second round. So there was a little bit of misinformation campaign around it. And in the middle of the context of the election, a famous PDF report in Latin America came out, made by the OAS, which is like the Organization for American States, in which this PDF report basically said it is statistically unlikely that Morales obtained the 10% difference to avoid the second round. And at that point in time, whatever like happened, I mean, the civil society came out and say, okay, where is the data of this report? Because it was a PDF report. And some people were saying, no, Evo Morales got the difference. Other people say, no, he didn't got. So the civil society went out and said, okay, where is the data that supports this? Because you're saying it's statistically unlikely. Okay, can I have the data? And in the PDF, there were some fancy models, statistical models to do some predictions. And we say, okay, we don't know, we don't have access to this, we can replicate the result. And this PDF has like a strong political support, and that leads to all the political chaos that live in Bolivia after that election. So without going into detail, the problem was that there was like a PDF report that had massive consequences in the political process without access to the data behind it. And then we started seeing like the same problem again and again and again in all the Latin Americans and not Latin Americans, American elections. Back in those days, we have like the same problem. I mean, in the United States, they say, okay, Trump had like this huge campaign. Now there is fraud. I don't recognize the results. Then Bolsonaro in Brazil came and say, I don't recognize the results. And now in Argentina, the far right is also saying, we are not going to like recognize the results because they are not counted correctly. So there was in Latin America an attack on electoral processes, and the common denominator to all these major attacks on democratic elections is based on mistrust of electoral results. I mean, it's like using the fraud. We do not recognize the results of the elections. That's like the huge miscampaign. And these kind of disinformation campaigns are highly successful because, in part, to the lack of participation of the citizens in the electoral processes, to the lack of knowledge, and to the lack of information about how democratic processes works. In Argentina, we are seeing this, like they do not count votes, but they are saying that in a preliminary count that does not have like legal boundaries, so citizens that doesn't know correctly how democracy works, and that's why when someone says fraud, they don't have like tools to fight against that misinformation. So that's why at the Open Knowledge Foundation, we believe that open by design electoral processes will bring several benefits, including and not limited to, but including, it will increase the information available to citizens to counter misinformation campaigns. I mean, it's hard to defend democracy if we do not know how democracy works. So if we have like open by design electoral processes, we are going to have more information to counter these misinformation campaigns. And also, open by design electoral processes will make democracies more participative and therefore less vulnerable. I mean, if we have like a strong engagement of citizens in the electoral processes, then these allegations of fraud are less viral because everyone knows how it works, everyone participates, and yeah, if everyone trusts the system, this fraud is completely like ignored. So we are starting this project of digital public infrastructure for electoral processes with a clear vision. And our vision is that a digital public infrastructure will enable a healthy ecosystem of information around electoral processes. What is our mission? Our mission is to create and promote an ecosystem of open data, standards, and open source technologies to make electoral processes more auditable, participatory, with the aim of improve the quality of democratic life. And what is our specific goal for 2024? Our specific goal for 2024 is to create and enable an international coalition to advocate, design, and implement building blocks for a digital public infrastructure for electoral processes that will be reused and shared to make democratic processes more reliable, resilient, and transparent. So that's our main goal for the next year, and and that's the reason why we are kicking all these round table, because we want to build this international coalition to help us building this digital public infrastructure. And what we mean with building blocks and what we mean with digital public infrastructure, to give you some concrete examples of the work that needs to be done. We want to build electoral data standards, data standards for government to publish all their electoral data, like districts, polling stations, candidates, results, campaign finances, voter registration, and results of the election. I mean, Argentina has like a beautiful experience of publishing like the results in a standard way, and that is allowing like the whole civil society to fight this misinformation campaign about the fraud. We want to build API for publishing these results, open source web servers that can publish the elections results during the electoral processes, so people have in real time what is going on with the election. Also based in some experiences that they were counting votes, they stopped counting, 2 hours later, the tendency completely changed, no one knows why. That kind of like things that creates lack of trust in the process. Open data portals. We want to create more open data portals for repository of historic data of previous elections. Again, Argentina publish all their data of the elections in the open data portal, so people have access to all the historical of elections and can start doing analysis. Okay, is this trend valid? Have we seen this? Is this shift in votes possible? I mean, more information is more easy for civil society to fight these campaigns. And lastly, absent information, official information from official sources. We believe strongly that official information of elections should come from official sources. Even when media are like the more that broadcast the results, there should be an official place for citizens to get data from. So they can fact check and validate and do not depend on some media outlet to get informed. And also apps and applications that help people to transit the electoral process. Where I vote, who are the candidates, what are the proposals of all candidates, what are the results in my polling station, who is financing the campaign. I mean, if we have the data and we have these applications, we can create this ecosystem of information. But for this, we need to do a lot of advocacy, which is like the second part of the project. Like the first one is pushing for these building blocks that I have mentioned, and the second part of the project is to do advocacy. There is a lot of work to do around advocacy. For example, first, open by design. This is the public infrastructure. Even when the last G20 makes like a huge thing of the digital public infrastructure, is still not open by design. The official definition of digital public infrastructure is still defined as technologies that can be open, but they don't force the digital public infrastructure to be open. That's a huge advocacy campaign that we need to do. advocacy again in transparency. We need to do a lot of advocacy with media and with journalists on how the electoral processes work, because to defend democracy, we must be able to understand it first. Interdisciplinary community. This is not a process that will be fixed only by technology. We understand that technology is not the solution, it's just a tool. So we want to create a coalition with a lot of actors and not only with technology. That's why in these roundtables, there are people that are not technologists. We like to work with journalists, with politicians, with political scientists. In the first roundtable, we have like a congresswoman from Guatemala, journalists for several medias. So an interdisciplinary community is important for this project. And lastly, this project is about enhancing democracy. The important thing of digital public infrastructure and why we like this concept is because digital public infrastructure is about building blocks. It's about small elements that countries can reuse to make their democracies better. It's not about how democracy should be. It's not about exporting democracy. It's about providing to countries with elements and tools so they can with the sovereignty decisions engage their democratic processes. Before finishing, it's not about voting systems. We want to make this clear. It's not about going to a country and say how they need to implement their voting system. It's about how open source technology can support all the stages of electoral processes. Yes, this is not about electronic voting or like doing voting through machines or through software. It's about like the whole electoral process, from like the polling station, from like the districts, from like the register of voters, from like the register candidates. There is a whole ecosystem of information around it. And it's not about pushing for electronic voting systems. So in conclusion, open by design electoral processes, only open by design electoral processes will guarantee accountability, transparency, resiliency, and explainability, which we believe are core things of a democratic process. And democracies needs to be more participative. And only openness can create the foundation for that. I mean, it's good to talk about democracy, but if we have like 40% of participation, 50% of participation, that's not enough. We need to engage more, and we need to build more participative democracies. So that's the overview of the project. So which are like the next steps? And a little bit Sarah mentioned this at the beginning. We are engaging as a first step, and that's the goal of this roundtable, for a collaborative mapping. We are like currently receiving expression of interest to work in electoral processes, and we are registering all these projects and people that are interested in under the umbrella of our current projects, which are the Global Directory and the Project Repository. Currently, at the Open Knowledge Foundation, we have two huge network projects, which are the Global Directory and Project Repository. With the Global Directory, what we want to do is to connect a specialist of the open movement. So basically, if you find a person that you believe that needs to be in this Global Directory, please contact us, contact Sarah. There is like more description in the link that I'm sharing here in the network at .okf.org. And also Project Repository. If you have like a project that is related to electoral processes, please write to us, and we are going to include this project into our Project Repository. And with this collaborative mapping, we're going to start having like an overview of what's going on. Basically, we want this project to be bottom up. Because we know that elections, even when they share a lot of things, they are different. So we don't have like a recipe. So we want to map and this whole infrastructure to be built bottom up. So we don't want to dictate what to do. We want to see what the locals are doing. We believe in the power of local. So this is the effort that we're doing at the Initium, to map what is going on and start interconnecting. And maybe one thing that has been developed in one country fits like the problem of another country, and we can start creating a network and a coalition to work on this. Thank you so much. Sorry, I went a little bit fast, but yes, time is pressure here. And the idea here, more than me talking, is to listen to all of you. We want to understand what are you working on, what are your challenges, your next steps, and start knowing each other. So yeah, thank you for your time. I hope it was clear enough. If you have any question, let's wait until the end. There is going to be like a round table. After the end, there is going to be like a section for question and answers. Yes, thank you very much. Back to you, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks, Patricio. So as Patricio just mentioned, I'm sure that many of you might have comments or questions, but let's keep those to the end. And now I would invite Julia Brothers to maybe share a little bit about her own experience with elections. You should be able to share your screen, Julia. And again, I'm going to be timing for maximum 5 minutes. And I'm going to be strict about it. And I'm sorry already.
No worries. No worries. I can do this. Yes, thank you. I'm Julia Brothers. Sorry, I kind of lost my voice a little bit. But I work at the National Democratic Institute, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that we mostly work with local civil society organizations on monitoring elections. And we work, part of that is what we call the Open Election Data Initiative. And this is really based on the premise that electoral data belongs to the people. Elections are a public process. Elections are the most democratic process there is. And so all of that information should really belong to the people. And I think, like Patricio sort of already mentioned, there are all of these kinds of pieces of data that come from the electoral process. Results information is really important, but there are also all of these things that are produced in the pre-election period that we think are really important. Things like meeting minutes from an election management body, or how the boundary delimitation process was done, or, a consolidated legal framework that is available to everybody. Information on the candidate nomination and ballot qualification process. All of these things that are made available in the pre-election period, on election day, or in the immediate post-election period. And all of that needs to be made publicly available. This is, of course, information that is critical to ensuring that voters have the information that they need to effectively participate in the process and make an informed choice on election day. Things like, where's my polling station? Who's on my ballot, right? Am I registered to vote? Is there anything that I need to bring when I go vote, right? That's kind of basic voter information. But it's also information that helps citizens know, and citizens and political stakeholders and electoral stakeholders know about the quality of the election process and electoral integrity. So were electoral constituencies fairly drawn? Who was allowed to run as a candidate? And are there enough registration centers or polling stations in a certain area? How are they distributed? Does that sort of benefit some populations over others? So this is really important information in a lot of ways. One of the things we do at the Open Election Data Initiative is think about how to really measure this level of openness. It's not enough just to have the information available, right? We know it has to be available in certain ways and accessible in certain ways. So we look at things like the timeliness of the information. Is it available while it's still meaningful, while it can still help voters, why it can still help people who are analyzing an election? What's the level of granularity? When it comes to election results, right? It's not enough to just have it on a constituency level. It's really important that you have it at the polling station level. Is it available for free and ideally on the internet? That's the most accessible way for people to get this information. A lot of places are like, oh, it's available, it's free, but you have to drive to the Capitol and physically pick up a paper copy. That's not good enough. Is it available is it complete and in bulk? So you don't have to scour around a website and like download an individual PDF for every single district in a country, right? Like that you want an actual complete data set that's available in bulk. that it's machine analyzable, right? That it's in a JSON file or a spreadsheet or something like that, that you can actually, it's machine readable, that it's non-proprietary, right? There's no sort of, you don't have to pay for this, you don't have to register for it, and it's non-discriminatory. Anybody has access to it. It's license fee. You don't have to have special software or anything to use it, and that it's permanently available. And I think this is something that is really key. I think this is something that election management bodies really struggle with. You might have a lot of information about one specific election around when it's relevant, but not having that archived data for previous elections, and that's obviously, that's really important historical data. It's really important reference data to even be able to compare elections over time. I just wanted to highlight a few sort of kind of trends we're seeing around open election data, and some of this is some things that Patricio already touched on. But I think one thing that we're seeing is, election management bodies are doing a much better job using social media to get election information out there. That's great, reaching voters where they are, but it's not sufficient, right? You're still, just because you put it on social media doesn't mean that like you're done, because that's going to get lost really fast. It's not really, you're a slave to the algorithm. It's really difficult to find after it's been posted. And so, just because you put it on social media, it doesn't mean you need to put it permanently somewhere else that's easy to find. New actors and new technologies impacting data openness. This includes things like vendors that are involved in election technologies, right? This includes social media platforms that are doing political ads. There's suddenly a lot of other places that we need to sort of encourage, oftentimes third-party actors, that they need to be more transparent about election data. It's not just election management bodies or governments, but also these other vendors, maybe private entities that are involved in elections. Like Patricio kind of already mentioned, opening data, we know, builds confidence in electoral institutions. Transparency helps these election management bodies. It inoculates them from disinformation, which we know is kind of an increasing issue, and like the eroding confidence in democratic institutions. And that, election data is an important tool to fight against disinformation. So this is a win-win. But we know that governments and election management bodies are still sort of struggling to commit to some of these standards, to commit to some of these sort of levels of openness. Some of it is they sort of just don't know how, or they don't have the resources, or they don't have the political will. And so it's also kind of finding what the weakness is, to sort of appropriately advocate against that. So I'll leave it at that. Your
time is over.
Yep. Okay. But please, we have the Open Election Data Initiative, where you can kind of learn more about what we're doing and these sort of standards that we're pushing. And I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Julia. And now I leave the floor to Joël Gombin.
Thank you. Can I share my screen? Yes, I can. Okay. Hang on. Okay, I'll do it like this, and we'll see. All right. Okay, for some reason I can't share my screen, I think. It's with my system, so don't worry. But it doesn't matter. I'll share with you the link for the slides I wanted to show you today. So
Joël, do you want me to share the slides maybe?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, if you can.
Yeah. Sure.
Great. Okay, so what I wanted to very quickly talk about was about going the last mile concerning open election returns in France, and it's very online with what Julia just shared. So France has a first-class electoral data collection process. We've had large-scale elections for almost 2 centuries now, and I think France is a pioneer in terms of voting technologies. So this is good, and maybe you've heard about Thomas Piketty's last book, who uses election data since 1848 to draw a history of political conflict in France. And it's really interesting, in particular in terms of the data he collected and he used, and they're open data, by the way. So the data we have at the moment in France in terms of electoral returns are reliable, usually, more or less. There can be errors, but overall they're pretty reliable. They're pretty exhaustive. We have electoral data about every election in every place, and it's quite good. It's open. There's no issue about license or access. It's free. It's timely. Something remarkable is that we have the detailed fine-grained results of all elections usually the day after the election in the morning. So for a US listener, this might come as a shock. And also these data are very fine-grained. We have 35 or 36,000 communes and over 70,000 voting stations, bureau de vote. And we have data for all these levels. And also we have a nice and pretty long time series. We have results at the commune level since 1992 and at the voting station level since 2002. So it's pretty good. A few months ago, something very nice came along, which is that we now have voting stations level boundaries, geographical boundaries for the voting stations, which we did not have previously. So the voting stations level results were not that useful without the boundaries, but now we have them, or at least we will have them for the ongoing elections. So that will be very interesting, because one voting station in France is around 1,000 voters. So it's a very fine-grained. However, it is very hard to actually use this data. The data are not available in a single place. They're a bit all over the place in many different files. The data are not available in single formats. Like almost every election, the Interior Ministry slightly changes the format in which these data are distributed. The format is very often not truly machine readable. Maybe 10 years ago, I had to write an R package just to be able to actually read these files. The geographical units change over time. The commune slightly change over time. The voting stations boundaries also, they might change at every election. And there is no univocal way of describing candidates and parties, which also, of course, change a lot over time. And this is very difficult because we have very different kind of elections in France, and we have elections at a lot of different levels, and the rules are different at every level. Whether you're voting for a given person or party or list differs at each election, and so it can be pretty difficult to link all these results. Therefore, there's a lot of work to use this data, and here I speak as a former political scientist. Whether it is for one-off analysis, and even more if you want to go into longitudinal analysis. And therefore, I think we need a modern way of publishing this data, and I'm very much in line with what Julia said earlier, even though I have a much more national point of view than her. We need a single place to find the data. We need it distributed both as batch files, but also as APIs. come on, it's 2023. And in an ideal world, we would need them as semantic data, I think, linked to Wikidata, for example, to refer to what the parties may be, to refer to what the candidate, to whoever the candidates might be, and so on. So what I just said is not a project yet, but it's something I've been thinking about for years, both as a political scientist and then as an open data activist and professional. I think decently connected to both the scientific community in France and the institutional people running this kind of thing in the Ministry of Interior and that kind of thing. So I would be very glad to work with all of you to implement an open election data standard in the French context. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joël. That was very useful. Judith, it's your turn now.
Thank you very much. This is Judith Meyer from DM25, the Democracy in Europe Movement 2025. And I work as the IT coordinator and web developer for this organization. Also, I was involved in the 2 national elections in Greece this year. In May and June, Greece had national elections, and my role was to create tools to facilitate electoral observation in Greece. It's an interesting country to work in because in some ways it is very avant-garde, but in some other ways it's very tricky still. So, for example, we have a voter database which can be queried by API. There are databases of voting centers. Notice the plural, databases, so that is one of the problems that we had. But the biggest problem is really that the state does not guarantee that every party's ballots will be in every voting station. It is up to the parties to print ballots and to deliver them to the different voting stations. And if these get dirtied or lost, chucked out by a malicious actor during the day, the parties have to figure out that that is happening and to find replacement. And that can be really tricky. Essentially, every party has to organize their own electoral oversight committee. So the system that I created was first, I used the database of 21,000 Greek voting booths. I combined them with some geolocation data and with our members database, which is also geolocated. This way I was able to suggest to people where they could volunteer in the voting centers near them and make it as easy as just clicking a few checkboxes to let us know where they would be volunteering, which greatly increased the number of people volunteering to do so, because we made it easy. Then we provided documents like identification as an observer, rules of what they could be doing, the complaints forms already pre-written for them, so they wouldn't have to ask our lawyer to write something on the spot. We gave them some training. We provided community to allow the volunteers to know who else is working with them in the same district. On the day of the election itself, the voters were able to report any issues that they saw, like missing ballots for a particular party or lack of independent voting commission or other issues. They were able to report it via a form on a website, via the app, or by calling our center. These complaints would all wind up in the same database that also has the knowledge of which volunteers should be at these voting booths where the problems are occurring. And the system was able to automatically send an SMS and email to the right person assigned to this station. At the same time, we were able to keep a central overview of everything that is happening. And after the actual voting, when the count takes place, we had some observers staying for the count. They provided us manual reports, obviously not in all 21 stations, but just some of them. We got paper results in order to compare them with the results provided by the government, because there was some worry about this digital system. It was run basically by a cousin of the prime minister. So we wanted to be sure that the local results actually match the results that we're getting through the system. and also to compare it with previous results from the same areas. So we ran some automatic checks on that. And the main issues that we encountered with the digital data as provided by the Greek state right now is one, that it's disjointed. The voting centers did not have address data, in some cases not even the city data. Geolocation solutions for Greece, even Google Maps is still very bad at finding out where places actually are. The voting centers, the IDs did not match with previous years. So there's a lot of data from previous years, but every year the same place has a different ID. It makes it really hard to compare and see how plausible a result is for a particular place. And the other issue is that we had second-class access. Everyone was supposed to get the same kind of data during the count. But we noticed that the data that we got arrived later and was less complete, not as granular as that was the data that was shown on TV when they did the analysis. So that can still be improved. Sorry. So I would be interested in working on something like this on an open source basis and make it applicable for other countries, because I believe that being able to observe the electoral process is a very important part, and it should not be left to the big parties that can organize to have volunteers in 21,000 places. But there needs to be a possibility for grassroots to band together and do some bottom-up observation as well. And during those months, I was way busy and burned out. I wasn't able to work on this on a broader platform or open source platform, but I'm ready to work on that now that I have a bit more breathing room. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judith. That was definitely super interesting and great work there. Samuel, it's your turn now.
Hi, I'm Samuel. I'm the research director of the MIT Election Data and Science Lab, and I'm here to deliver some devastating news calling in from the United States, because unfortunately this country could not possibly be farther from the beautiful vision that every previous speaker has laid out. So here at the MIT Election Data and Science Lab, which we call MEDSL, just pronouncing its acronym, MEDSL, we're doing a lot of different stuff, but the main thing that I think is most germane to this discussion today is what we call the Precinct Project, which is our effort after every federal election, or every national election, I should say, in the United States, to collect election result data from the most granular level possible. Now, the fundamental challenge and the crucial context here is that the US federal government has essentially no role in collecting and certifying election data. So I'm actually from Canada originally. In Canada, if you want to know the polling place level election result data, previous speakers have spoken about in Greece and in France, the equivalent also exists in Canada, where you can just, in that case, go to the federal government's website and download a spreadsheet that has the number of votes that every candidate got at every polling place. Absolutely nothing comparable exists in the United States. The federal government does not have a webpage where you can go and access election result data. Even for the federal nationwide contest of the presidency, the US government is relying on actually counties, which are subdivisions of states in most cases, to count the votes, then to certify the votes, and then the states to report those votes. And then they just count up what all of the states said to figure out who won the presidential election. So we essentially do that core government function. In the US, it's outsourced to universities. There are a few organizations I want to mention. We do our precinct project. There's also the voting and election science team in Florida, and there is Open Elections, so there which crowdsources this effort. So there are a few different groups that do precinct data with slightly different flavors of data set that come out of it. And we've accumulated about 50 million rows, a little bit more than that, of candidate precinct level election result data over the last 4 election years, so since 2016. Importantly, so a precinct in the US also is not exactly a polling place level election result. Precinct boundaries are determined at the very, very local level. They shift constantly. It may not be actually publicly known where the precincts are. So what you get out of that is not even polling place candidate level election results. It's some granular reporting of how many votes a candidate got, but it may vary. Some so-called precincts will actually be aggregated across an entire county of many, many, many thousands of voters, and others might be a single apartment building and we know exactly where it is. So even there, it varies dramatically in how granular and clear the data are. And this, just to give you a sense for the scale of how much work that takes, it's about half a dozen to a dozen computer science students here at MIT that I oversee to gather that data from websites which range from, let's say, in the case of Minnesota, they will post a spreadsheet on their website that is extremely close to the data that we want at the end of the project. And we just go there, download it. Cleaning it and standardizing it and quality assuring it are very, very straightforward. Ranging to, I won't, name and shame anybody, but there are states where, for example, they may embed the data in graphics, and we have to write a custom scraper to go automatically download 500 different, let's say, JSON files or text files, and then collate them into a data set, clean and standardize them, and quality assure them. We've even had cases where states will write down the vote totals, take a picture, and upload it to their website. And then we have to use optical character recognition. So this takes about half a year to a year for about a dozen of us to do. With an eye on the clock, I do want to shout out two other projects that we have that are kind of relevant. Well, I have like 20 seconds left. So let's say one more thing. We recently collected election audit data from around the country, which I don't think had been done before, collecting as many results of election audits in the US as we could get our hands on. Spoiler alert, they show quite an accurate election in 2020. So I think my time is up, but keep an eye out for more about that.
Thank you very much, Samuel, and thanks for sticking to the time like this. Really appreciate it. Polash, it's your turn now.
Okay, thanks. So I'll be showing you a very simple thing that we have done in Bangladesh with regards to the politicians who contest for parliamentary seats in Bangladesh. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So we have this is the website of Bangladesh Election Commission. So they have their all the PDF files and these things on their website. They're supposed to have, but whenever I'm going to see, this is the problem with our data sources. Though all this data are open in a sense, they are available on the websites, but whenever we are trying to reach the site, it may not reach there. So most of the time, we find these things the site is down or things. So what we have done, we have collected the we have developed a portal on it's called PolitiPro, the politicians' profiles. So whenever someone is going here on this website, and we have 300 constituencies across Bangladesh. So this is in Bangla, you won't understand it, I believe still. So whenever someone is going, and they can find the candidates who is contesting for how many elections, their basic informations. And if you go there, you could use also the Google Translate for Git, and you will get these things in English formats. So we have gathered all their wealth, assets, their liabilities, their election pledges, their the loans of the candidates from banks and other things, their incomes and cases against them. All this, we have developed this platform where all this data are available, and anyone can download this data also for reuse and with free. So this is basically focusing on the politicians' informations, but we want to work on the vote data thing. We are currently trying to collaborate with some other organizations, since we have the election in very recent time, most probably in January 2024. So we are trying to work with some other organizations if we can come up do something on the vote data thing, historical vote data from 1991 to these days. And that's it from my end for now. And thank you again for giving me the chance to share our initiative from Bangladesh on this platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Polash. And well done to sticking to even less than the time that was assigned to you. That's great. Yes, thanks so much, Polash. Jelena, you're up next.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you to both of you, to you and Patricio, for inviting me and to all these interesting talks and projects presented. Looking forward to more discussion. So I'm actually coming not with a particular project, but rather with this experience for now. It comes to some big data, almost 40 or something election observation missions in a number of different countries in different roles. So recently it was also in Greece and in Bulgaria. And thinking about digital public infrastructures these days, I kind of identified three main pain points that I think are very actual at this moment, and that these parts of electoral processes require additional open data as they are becoming more and more distant to voters. The first one, I would say, is about political advertising and the fact that there is a lot of third-party advertising, which is kind of meddling into the whole process and which is making the whole, let's say, political environment much more obscure to the to voters. With OSCE, we have been there was a kind of a methodology being developed on observation of social media, and based on this experience, I can say that this is obviously, as we all know, becoming more and more actual in many countries. And it's not only about, let's say, foreign interference. It's about the fact that in particular countries, there is a lot of third-party advertising, which brings us also to the second point, the second pain point, which is campaign finance. And it's the fact that, speaking about the money, where the money is coming from, this is something that voters usually do not know. Who is financing the campaigns and how much money is going into different campaigns. So it's very interesting what Polash was saying, that they were even presenting different loans of the political actors, if I understand correctly. And I can mention as an interesting project in Bulgaria, the organization IPED, that has been working on these things, on campaign finance, and kind of bringing it to everyday voters. And the third pain point is definitely something that was obviously mentioned by Julia and Joël already, and by Patricio at the beginning, the fact that how election results are presented, it is rarely done in a way that is easily accessible, easily researched on. So it's not about new voting technologies and the fact that there is a lot of talk about electoral integrity when it comes to new voting technologies, because, for instance, in Bulgaria, we had recently two different political coalitions one standing behind the paper-based vote and the other one behind the machine-based vote, and each of them obviously accusing the other one of the lack of electoral integrity. So it's not about which technology is being used, but how do we misspell all this information, and the fact that actually bringing it closer to everyday voter, the fact that new voting technologies are involved, and this was also mentioned by Julia, there are, let's say, private companies that are more and more involved in the electoral processes, which are being outsourced by the states. This is actually bringing the whole process more away from voters. So having a digital public infrastructure that would be presenting this data, these election results, is kind of bringing back the human touch, and ironically, digital is bringing back the human touch, because it's no longer unintelligible to voters. What does it mean to, when you have all these companies speaking about encryption, what does it mean? It means nothing, basically. And just for the last point I wanted to make is kind of to maybe to invite us all to think about where the electoral process starts and does it end ever? And the fact that electoral systems are quite an important aspect of each electoral process. And as we know that based on the electoral system, the outcome of the same election could be completely different. whether we speak, for instance, in Greece, there was quite recently a change of electoral systems, ongoing change, which brought the different form of the government at the end. So that would be all from my side.
Thanks, Jelena. Thanks for bringing up your experience and for making some very interesting questions that we can ask ourselves. Angelo, you're up next.
Yes, I'm gonna share my presentation. I think you can see it. So first of all, thanks for having me here. This is a super interesting panel, and I'm very humbled to be included in it. I'm gonna present Indecis.it, that's how we call it in Italian, which translates to undecided, which is a project I and some other people have built last year for the elections, national elections in Italy. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Angelo Gulina. I'm a software engineer and data activist and wannabe philosopher. I actually recently graduated in philosophy with a dissertation on what is ignorance and the consequences that this has on the quality of democracy's outcomes. In the proposal, in the dissertation, I actually consider the proposal of restricting the universal suffrage, and of course, I object to it. Why I'm saying that? Because Indecis.it is actually a practical consequence of my overthinking about how people can contribute to make democracy better, in a sense. Indecis.it was also Plan B. I won't have time to talk about this, but happy to take some questions. Let me say Indecis.it was a project that was thought firstly for non-expert people, non-expert voters, and especially for the undecided ones. We have a great debate in Italy about what the undecided are going to vote, and if the undecided are actually, swing the vote and the elections in a direction or the other one. So when I first thought, how can those people, find their feet in the overwhelming promises of other parties? That's where Indecis.it came out. Of course, I didn't build this by myself, but the team was quite big and very supportive. They were very, very, very supportive and very great people working with us. Indecis.it, in short, gives a comprehensive view of where the election, the parties and the coalitions said they would stand on certain topics. And at least in my view, it arguably makes it easier for the people to reason about the differences between the parties. I won't go into the details of the view, of course. Indecis.it also offers a more detailed page, tries to deep dive into each subject, and also tries to give some sort of explanation of what this subject is about. For example, if we talk about rights to citizenships, or if we talk about abortion rights, procreative rights, and so on and so forth, we try to give a description there for people that might not be very comfortable with all those themes. Indecis.it is definitely in this sense a powerful platform, and beside the UI, it has a great amount of data. I think that's the most important part, which is open data. I will give a link at the end of the presentation. Challenges to build Indecis.it have been definitely resources, time, money, and all of this, and finding the people. Although the team that we eventually found was a great one, we were very happy collaborating all together in a sync and remote fashion. Another challenge was coming up with the right taxonomy, in a sense, to find the proper categories and subjects, because those are not embedded in the programs that we then had to read. And yeah, I think the biggest challenge was actually finding the data. The team had actually to read all the programs or each interview or article to build the data set basically by hand. There was no chat GPT at that time, and I'm not sure we can do it either with that now. Shortcomings of the project, of course, it's, as I said, it's of course by the creator a powerful platform, but definitely it doesn't offer any explanations of how the parties would want to support their proposals. For example, in terms of economical support, for instance, if you want to support a universal income program, this will cost money, and none of the parties would provide any explanation of how those financial resources could be found. To address this shortcoming, we actually included what was some sort of fact-checking provided by Pagella Politica, which is an Italian fact-checking online newspaper. Another shortcoming of the project was that it doesn't offer a coherent view of each party's program. So in other words, it's not easy to identify possible inconsistencies. If you think about the universal income program again, and a party wants to match these with a tax cut, it is not immediately evident how you can gain more resources to finance the universal income program while at the same time cutting the tax, and so at least from taxation get less financial resources. And this shortcoming was actually never addressed. Also, Indecis.it might not be in a sense a long-lasting project. However, I think there are two ideas that could be kept alive. One is that with the great amount of data we gathered, it might be a nice tool for civic monitoring and fact-checking. The other one was a more ambitious or maybe naive idea that the categories we use and the way we build a taxonomy could become something that is more open or institutionalized. And so each party, when the elections are coming, could actually submit the program following a taxonomy and making it then easier for voters and citizens to interrogate the programs and have the information they want to have to make to make their choice. I think that's it from my side, and thanks again for having me here.
Thanks, Angelo. It was great to hear again about Indecis.it, which is a tool that I love. Sicco, you're up next.
Thanks. Let me share my screen quickly. Entire screen. Allow. Great. Are you seeing my slides right now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so my name is Sicco van Sas. I'm a developer at Open State Foundation for the past 8 years. At Open State Foundation in the Netherlands, we try to open up government using open data. We focus on all issues that are present in government, from decision-making, finances, the results of what government produces. And elections are definitely a part that we focus on. Once we've opened up the data, either doing it ourselves or working with government, we try to stimulate reuse via hackathons, events, examples. So let me talk about one of our biggest projects regarding elections. It's called Waar is mijn stemlokaal.nl, or Where is my polling station? In the Netherlands, elections are always hosted by municipalities, and they publish their polling station information in all kinds of ways, like PDFs with only addresses, HTML pages, or even nice interactive maps. But we obviously want this data in one big data set so that you have like the big map where all other government websites can link to, and search engines can directly point to. So we created an open standard together with the government, where we collect all kinds of information about the polling station, obviously its location, its name, its number, but also a lot of information about accessibility for people with less hearing or visual functions. We publish the data that we collect as open data, both in bulk and via an API. Publish the source code of this website, obviously. So we have like the holy trifecta of open data, open source, and open standards, which is for me always a good project. In 2017, during the national elections, we collected all this data ourselves, and the website was used by roughly 1 million people. So that was the call for us to say, okay, this is a popular project. We should definitely do this. And since then, we have gotten a subsidy from the Ministry of Internal Affairs. And these days, we actually have elections in a few weeks. 90% of the municipalities publish their data on our platform. Problem is that it takes a lot of work for them to do this. So they have their own website and they have to publish it at our website. So we asked them if they have certain election software to open up an API so we can pull the data from their source. So there's no copying of data around. And nearly 20% of the data of all the municipalities is currently gathered via APIs. So that's the future. The data is being reused, so other websites make their own maps because we collected the data and opened it up. Like the biggest Dutch public broadcaster does analyses using the data about how accessible the polling stations are. There's parliamentary questions that can be answered, again, about accessibility of polling stations. So there's a lot of value in this data set. There's an evaluation after each election on like also done by the parliament. And in the end, we can combine the locations of the polling stations with the results of the elections to have, again, this is a collaboration with a Dutch newspaper to show all the results per polling station on the map. Something else we do with elections, we collect the election programs, put them in Aleph, which the great OCCRP produced the software and make it better searchable and comparable. The candidate lists used to be published by the election office, the Dutch election office, but in PDF. So we used to scrape them and publish them in machine-readable formats. But nowadays, they luckily also publish it in machine-readable formats because of our pool for this data. And, well, I'm almost done through my time, but we nowadays have donations to political parties, which have to be published within 3 days, but it's again not published perfectly by the government, so we put some GitHub comments on it to show the difference between each data set. So thanks for listening to my talk. That's it.
Thanks, Sicco. That's super interesting. Thanks so much. Okay, last but not least, we have Chris Taylor now. Chris.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Taylor. I work for the Council of Europe in the Division of Elections and Participatory Democracy. This division is part of a wider framework within the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe has a lot of electoral undertakings. What I would recommend doing, because I have no presentation as such, I wanted to listen to everybody and sort of feedback on what I heard. I would recommend Googling COE, Council of Europe, and electoral cycle. And then you sorry, could the last speaker turn off his mic, please?
Yes.
Thanks. So then you will find all of the information about the Council of Europe. You have a Congress, Council of Europe, which observes elections, local and regional elections. You have the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, which observes national elections. We have the Venice Commission, which devises standards and legislation and provides legal opinions to countries upon not just electoral things, but all types of things. And then you have electoral assistance, which is what I'm involved in. So within our team, we work with Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine at the moment, doing technical assistance on elections. So I'm not an open data specialist, but I will sort of touch upon some of the things that have been talked about. I was fortunate enough to go to an election management body conference in Georgia last week, and it made me think about things and mindsets to how things are undertaken. So I'd like to pick up on some of the aspects that were sort of mentioned previously. So I had an interesting, not a European context, but I had an interesting conversation with the LA County Electoral Office last week. And they have a very open approach, and they have statistics that are available on their website. I appreciate this from a county perspective. It's not a federal perspective, as mentioned earlier, but they have very thorough, comprehensive, accessible website. And I found that their approach mindset was to making everything accessible from the beginning rather than retroactively changing things, which is good if you want to be open and transparent. The conference I went to last week was about digital elections, and the main takeaway of it was trust. There's no such thing as a perfect electoral system. There's no such thing as a perfect election. There will always be issues and problems. And even if you have a highly functioning electronic voting system, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to trust it. So it comes down to messaging. And I think Patricio mentioned, when he was speaking earlier, I wrote about dissemination approaches, and that In terms of electoral information, they need to be targeted to the needs of the electorate or citizens. You can't have, like, social media doesn't fit every need for every audience in terms of elections. You need to think about accessibility on the wider perspective. You need to think about accessibility in terms of people that have disabilities. You need to think about different hearing impairments, visual impairments, linguistic things. What I found particularly good in the LA County perspective was that they have all of their information resources are available in 19 languages, which is pretty amazing. But so going back to the, Jelena mentioned the Bulgarian example, which I'm going to Bulgaria next week, and they've just had 2 rounds of local elections there. That was quite interesting. First election, the first round, they decided that they're not going to use machine voting. And then they had a high court case for the second round just before it said they needed to use machine voting. So this is an interesting example. Bulgaria, I think since 2019, it's had sort of 7 or 8 elections, which is a lot. In 2021, they had 3 parliamentary elections in 1 year. And they have had a lot of legislative changes, and there's a lot of political influence. Judith mentioned the private provider of the election technology earlier, and the potential relation to someone in power in Greece. There are private companies that provide election materials. What I thought was interesting from the LA County perspective is that they don't use a private provider, and they have a plan within 2 to 3 years to make everything that they have open, completely open, accessible through free open licenses, which is a very positive example. Not that many countries do that. It's something that's a little bit difficult to achieve. And coming back to accessibility, I thought about evaluation. I wrote a paper earlier this year on accessibility for blind and partially sighted people in the UK context, where they've just introduced a new voting ID for the first time, which is partially controversial in the UK context, and they've also changed their accessibility provisions. They've done it in a kind of back to front case. There was a high court case, the government lost, and then they had to reintroduce the provisions, but instead of doing it on a countrywide scale, they put it down to county scale. So returning officers at county levels are legally responsible for accessibility provision. This is why I found that the LA example of designing something, a system that is accessible and that you can show the information and make everything transparent, I think that is a good way to go. But in terms of doing that, if you're not in that advantageous position of you have a healthy budget to prepare yourself, you have a larger electorate, and you have a specific team that can work on this full time, which a lot of countries don't have, then you need to have good evaluation. Another thing I do is work on Erasmus Plus projects, which are about education and participatory democracy, which are key things, and they all have good dissemination. You target the audience, and they have evaluation of their projects. And electoral commissions, they need this. Election management bodies need this, especially in terms of reviewing what they've done and how they've done it. Regarding the accessibility questions in the UK earlier this year, there was no standardized framework for assessing how they're going to review whether they have a truly accessible electoral system. So unless you have a standardized approach, and it's the same with making open data source format from what the presentations were saying earlier, unless you have a systematic approach to making information available, there's always going to be question marks over it. And this comes back to the trust thing. So I believe I've had over 5 minutes now, so I'm going to stop there, and then I'm happy to speak more later.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing this. That was the last one of our presentation. Now we can open the floor to discussion. So I don't know if anyone here has some immediate comments or questions that they would like to ask. You can either raise your hand or directly unmute yourself and ask it. Don't be shy. Steven.
Yeah, okay. I'll jump, I'll bite. So I haven't worked in electoral stuff at all, but I work with open data, and coming up in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to try and kick something off, which is around policy development, kind of evidence-based policy, and the connection back to democratic processes is how policies are risen up from government departments that might be evidence-based or how politicians, candidates might put policies into their portfolio, campaign on them, and then hopefully after some number of years be assessed against whether they delivered. And all of that is kind of a virtuous chain of activity where the candidates, the policies, and the policy execution all lines up, hopefully. So covering off trust as well. There was a lot of discussion yesterday on trust at the Open Data Institute Summit. And something that is interesting to me is that the kind of like the subjective trust, intersubjective trust, and objective trustworthiness of an assessed objective thing. And in elections, it seems that trust when it comes to individuals can be measured by behavior, how they behave in a situation, how well they're engaged with the democratic process is a measure of trust, not so much the trustworthiness of the process itself. There's a disconnect. Which just means that things like disinformation and misinformation can do a lot more harm than you might realize, is my estimation of it, right? And anyway, these are disconnected thoughts I'm patching together in a sec. The main thing that I think connects open data to all of this, which I think is super important for me, and that's where I work in, is that open data has always been promoted as this non-rivalrous information good that is fungible, and basically it can be cut up and chopped off and replicated and given off, and it won't diminish the value in that sort of process. However, even though information goods are non-rivalrous in that sense, they are contestable. And so what disinformation, misinformation does are fundamentally the degrading of trust in public institutions and democratic processes, and even apathy of an individual's willingness to make a decision. All of these degradations effectively make data and correctness or information contested. It's basically an information space where there's too much noise and the signal is basically irrelevant. So what I'm super interested in is this whole collection of stuff. If it basically removes all that entropy, whatever the entropy might be measured in terms of social, individual psychological, institutional practices, technical, auditability of everything. I think there's dimensions across all of this stuff, and it would be a multi-decade project. So yeah, I hope everyone's got some time. It looks awesome.
Thanks so much, Stephen. Is there any immediate reaction to Stephen? Okay, otherwise I'll pass it on to Jelena.
Thanks, Sarah. Well, I can echo what Stephen said, that it sounds like a great project. But at the same time, I will act as a devil's advocate a bit. I was thinking how the states will react to this project. I know definitely several states that wouldn't be so happy to have this open data presentation of electoral results. As I mentioned, this case, for instance, in Bulgaria, there were several NGOs that were collecting data based on their citizen election observation, and then analyzing data and finding different patterns when it comes to voting patterns, and obviously which were kind of strange voting behaviors exhibiting those patterns. Now with this open data that you mentioned, it will be easily accessible and easily deductible how actually whether the electoral integrity was in a way damaged or not. So do you have maybe any thoughts on that, on this negotiation process with the states and how to approach them? What's the nudge for them to accept the open data systems in electoral processes?
I have some suggestions, or at least a quick comment, because I have been an activist in Argentina since forever, and I engage a lot with governments, and I sometimes find like the generalization of sometimes is incorrect. I mean, you mentioned like, well, okay, how are states going to react to this project? And I think that it is not correct to generalize to states, because inside the states are people and are ministries or are like directions that want to open data. In my whole experience, in my whole life, I find always open doors in the state to open data. But it is true that you need to be intelligent with the political cycles of the project, because someday a person wants to open some data and another day that person doesn't want to open that data. So you need to ask that person for that data, and then in the next political cycle ask another person for like the data that the first one didn't want to arrive. So it's kind of like playing a little bit of the politics game with the states. And that's like the first. And the second one is like use like success cases. If one government opens it, then you automatically can go and say to other government, hey, they open it, so why they do and you don't? Why? You have such a shame for it? Why do you want to open it? So when you get one, use that bar to start like elevating, and step by step, you are like, and for example, now we are in the political process and a political cycle of like, we need to fight authoritarianism. So I think governments now will be like super engaged on participation with citizens to build and engage democracy. So I think we are just in a political cycle that we need to go to the states and say, hey, we want to defend democracy, give me data. And they are going to be more willing to that. So yeah, that's like my 2 cents on it.
Thanks. Thank you. Nick, you also had a question now.
Yeah, hi. I'm just really curious if anyone is thinking this, like we've been doing, you know, representative democracy for such a long time, like ever since like, you know, Roman Empire, right? But have we ever thought about the possibility of going back to direct democracy like ancient Greece, you know, the Athens? Now, previously it wasn't possible because, you know, the scalability, the physical space, you know, constraints, all that. But now we have internet, right? So, I mean, in a way, you can see social media in a way can play that function, but they aren't branded like that. They aren't designed like that. And we also know that media, doesn't matter what kind of media, because, you know, can go from traditional media and then it evolves into internet media and eventually social media. And media is, you know, just a way to, you know, keep people informed, or also keep people, you know, misinformed as well at the same time. It's double-sided sword. Now, what if we combine media and, you know, vox populi, you know, a way to gather people's voice? Now, can we have a thing that consolidate people's opinions? But obviously, you know, there's, you know, you need education, all that stuff, critical thinking, all that stuff. But what if we do that? Will that also become a force to be reckoned with, sort of like, you know, replicating Arab Springs, you know, white paper movement, Me Too movement, or, you know, a lot of those internet activism, right? Because at the end of the day, if you can sort of build a trustworthy, you know, I don't want to do electoral. We want to do, we don't care about election. We should care more about public issues. So that everyone is essentially politician. There will be no politicians, or rather everyone is a politician. So that's kind of like, you know, just wondering, is that a possibility that, you know, with the given technology that we have now? Because 20 years ago, it wasn't possible, but I think now is prime for that. Thanks.
Thanks, Nick. Any immediate reaction? Angelo.
I think
And
just
Judith,
quickly, I think
I'll
we
leave the floor
might.
to you after.
Oh, sorry, I can give space to Judith.
I think that our governments has become too complicated to have direct democracy, in the sense that if you look at the bills that are being passed in parliament and that parliamentarians spend 24/7 on, it's not something that the average citizen can follow at the same speed or even close or understand. So it's not possible without some mediation. Of course, you can have people decide, and I'm totally in favor of that, on like a Swiss model, like the referendum kind of level, where they say we want this thing to happen, but then you still need some people to implement this thing in terms of actual law, which is too complicated at this point. And the other issue is that we don't want majority rule. We want the interests of everyone, including minority groups, to be represented in our systems. So I believe it is more sensible to have mediating groups, interest groups, parties to work in this sense. This is something that DiEM25 is doing. We have an internal democracy where we talk about issues, for example, Israel-Palestine, or any issue that concerns a lot of people. And we discuss, we create a paper, we have people editing the paper if they want, and afterwards we vote on the result. So it is a process that is easier to do when you're among people who represent the same kind of current, the same kind of interests. And on that level, I think it is really important to have the possibility for people to get engaged and not just to be treated as well, in German we have this word Stimmvieh, voting beasts. It's like what the average centrist politician treats the people as, you know, like people that you ask once every 4 or 5 years to vote yes or no to your party proposition, but you don't really think about them the rest of the year. And this is something that I think is much more, well, there are two things that I think important. One is more referenda, binding referenda on various levels, and inner party democracy.
Thanks very much, Judith. Angelo, you also wanted to react, and then Chris, you have your hand raised and you go next.
Just quickly, I'm glad I let Judith talk, because I think I tend to agree with what she said. I just wanted to mention, I think Italy has had some sort of experiment of this sort with Movimento 5 Stelle, where they were trying to use the Rousseau, how they called platform, to engage their own, I mean, not all the Italian voters, but their own sort of affiliates. And I think one of the points, beside what also Judith already mentioned, is whenever you ask something to somebody, the way you frame the question is also important. So it's not just how much info you can gather on an issue, but how do you reply with a yes or no to something that it's quite complicated. This is not to dismiss Nick's proposal. There might be a way to actually do that, but then I think the good question is, should we actually do it? Which I think it's a question for another time.
Thanks, Angelo. Chris, very quickly, because we are at time.
Okay, I'll try and be quick. A quick plug for the Council of Europe. So in terms of participatory democracy, I'd recommend looking at that on the website as well. There's a civic lab, which is a tool for development, analysis and forecasting in decision-making processes, which is at local levels, municipal levels, which takes place in lots of countries. So this sort of comes back to one of the things that Judith was saying. I noticed earlier today, so the European Parliament has just passed, or they're about to pass, new measures on cracking down on external or public accessible information in terms of political advertising. So I'd recommend looking at that. They're going to process that within the next 24 months, and that will be for a period of 7 years. So that will coincide with European parliamentary elections next year. I just noticed that this morning. So the aim is to limit non-EU sponsors from interfering in European democratic processes. So that could be interesting. But going back to the point earlier on whether governments would be worried about open data, and drawing a parallel with election observation, Judith mentioned domestic observation earlier, Jelena mentioned international election observation. All countries that have election observers, they invite them. If it's an international election observation mission, if you're part of the OSCE, one of the 56 member states of the OSCE, you invite international election observers to come and observe the process in your country. It's the same for the 46 member states of the Council of Europe. So they're trying to be open and transparent in theory, because that's what they've signed up to be. So if they're being open and transparent, why wouldn't they be the same with having open data accessible to all members of all citizens of their country? It's to my mind, it's part of the same mindset. It's something they've signed up to do. So why would they fear that? I don't see that there's necessarily a strong parallel there. That's just my personal perspective.
Thanks very much, Chris. I would love to have the discussion ongoing, but I want to be mindful that we're already 2 minutes after time. There were some other questions in the chat, we'll try to reply to them by email. We'll follow up anyhow. We're going to write a blog to summarize this session. So you will receive some follow-up on those questions as well. I wanted to thank again every one of you who participated to this discussion. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us today. Let's keep the discussion ongoing. It has been great to hear about all your fantastic experience, and we'll definitely be in touch. I don't know if Patricio, you want to say a last word before we part?
No, I was just saying that after like hearing like all these amazing projects, I would like to be a billionaire and fund everyone, but yeah, we cannot. So yeah, it happens the same when I was in Latin America, like a lot of projects and a lot of cool ideas. So yeah, well, part of also like of the idea of building like an alliance and coalition is just like to start like looking for funds for all these projects. One of the goals that we have with the Open Knowledge Foundation is not to redo the wheel, but basically if you did something in Italy that is work and probably Ecuador can use it in Latin America, then let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's take the people from one place to another. So I hope like this collaboration, this alliance can like give us also like a better way to get funds for our projects. And as I say, we are going to follow up. And if you want to enter our project directory and our people's directory, please let us know. And yes, thank you so much for coming.
Yes, we'll be sending links to that as well. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.